A little chat, shall we? Let's have a little occult chat. This is your host, The Occult View. I meant to make this video yesterday, but I said some things in that video and I could not. I felt like Spirit did not want me to expose all. So I'm going to give a filtered version of what I was going to say yesterday, right? So here we go. I was watching a movie, and I've seen this movie before. It's called The Girl Next Door. It came out in 2008. And let me give you a warning and a disclaimer that this movie is very, very brutal. There's a lot of brutality in the movie, and there's a lot of abuse in the movie. You have to have a strong mind in order to watch that. Even as strong as I am, and I'm a pretty strong person physically and emotionally, but that movie was tough to watch. It was tough, but I stuck with it for occult purposes because I wanted to see the demons and the spirits that were being subliminally and symbolically represented in that movie. And basically, what it was about, just a brief summary or synopsis, it was about a very disturbed woman by the name of Ruth. And she took in her two nieces, Meg, and I forgot the other, young girl's name, the character's name. But she took in her niece, Meg, and Meg's younger sister, who looked like she was suffering from polio because she had leg braces. And back then in the 50s, because even though the movie came out in 2008, it was based on something that happened in the 50s. I do believe it's based on a true story, if I'm not mistaken. So she took her two nieces in after I believe their mother passed away. I really don't remember what happened to the father, but I think the mother passed away. And Ruth had 4 or 5 sons. And there was also a guy, a little young boy that lived next door. It was a little young boy that lived next door. And he was friends with the older sister, one of the young girls. He was old. He was friends with Meg. Meg was a beautiful, creative, kind, young woman. She was a teenager, but she was a young woman growing into her womanhood. And her aunt Ruth was insanely jealous of this. Ruth was a female version of a misogynist. She had a misogynistic demon on her. Misogyny is a demon. And I will tell you where it comes from in a minute. But there were a lot of revelations that came out of that movie. And when I say misogyny, let me be clear about what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about trying to degrade divine masculine energy. That's something totally different. That's another demonic trick or whatever. I'm talking about when you use your powers to bully and to bring imbalance into the world. That is, to me, demonic. That's low level demonic shit. But I'll get into all of that. There was a boy next door, and he and Meg, they were friends. Or they became friends. And he was telling the story about what happened to her and her sister from his point of view as an adult. He was an adult telling this story because in the beginning of the movie, he you see him as a grown man, the little boy next door. and an older gentleman was hit by a car. And that took him back to what happened to Meg because he felt responsible for it because he didn't say anything. He was going over there every day and he saw all of the torment and torture that she was going through. So I guess he felt complicit in it in some way. So to make a long story short, Ruth brutalized her two nieces, but Meg got the brunt of it. She began to have these ideologies, or she probably already had them, that being a woman meant that you were a slut. Being a woman who was friends with a younger man meant that you were a slut. She had all of these weird ideas about Meg. She thought that Meg was, a slut. She thought that Meg was always doing something nefarious. And that's because Ruth herself was possessed by the demon of misogyny. And that demon is also connected to the God Yahweh and Jehovah and Allah and the other different demons that people worship worldwide. And I don't give a fuck who gets offended. So when I really peel back the layers, I said, oh, I see what's happening. And this is where it goes into the spirituality. There's a story about how the God of the Bible that people have come to know, who goes by many different names, Yahweh, Jehovah, and in the Islamic religion, it's Allah. Even though Allah is actually a feminine deity that they stole and plagiarized from the Igbo people, but that's another story. You just take away one of the L's and take away the H, and that is the real Allah. It was a feminine deity. It was a divine feminine deity, and it had nothing to do with what they are saying. And in actuality, it kind of connects to, if you really examine it, if you really look at it, it kind of has similar traits to Oya and Santa Simia Moete. But that's another story. And Isis. So there is a story or mythology about the creation of that God. And it has many different names. It goes by Yahweh. It goes by the demiurge. I've even heard the name of Orion, Jehovah, etc., etc. You all get the picture. The story goes that the great mother, the real God, the great mother Sophia, she had a glitch in her, let's just say in her consciousness. And by mistake, it created this evil deity. And when this deity came into creation, when he came into consciousness and awareness, he saw nothing but dark waters around him. And he thought he was the only entity. He thought he was the only deity. He thought he was the all-powerful, all-knowing deity, but he really wasn't, because he lacked understanding. He lacked soul. He didn't have a soul. He didn't have a spirit. He was a mistake. So basically, he was a bastard child of 1,000 maniacs. As in the Freddy Krueger story. Freddy Krueger is also a symbol for this mistake as well. See, people, we got to go back to the 80s too and look at those movies. Freddy Krueger was also a representation of that deity, Yahweh. He was also a representation of that, because remember, his mother, Amanda Krueger, she was a nun, and she represented the mother Sophia, and she was trapped in that institution. What do they call it? Weston Hills. She was trapped in that institution over the holidays, and she was raped by all of those inmates and psychopaths, and she ended up pregnant with Freddy Krueger. And that is how he developed And then he began to develop his own powers. But then, they went down further down the line. We find out that he connected with some dream demons and they gave him his immortality. But nevertheless, you get what I'm saying. So in the mythology of the mother Sophia, who is the great god, which is where where the real Christ comes from, this evil deity began to create minions, children of his own. And that makes perfect sense. He began to create children of his own in the different levels of what people call the 7 levels of heaven and all that. That's why heaven is not all that it's hacked up to be. You know what I mean? That the heaven that people think about is really not the true heaven. So this evil deity became enraged when the great mother Sophia gave mankind the spark of life. And that is why this evil deity has been on a mission ever since to destroy mankind. And I was listening to Morgue Official. I love his videos. And I love the way he breaks things down. I love it. He was talking about a channel back in the 1980s that a group of people got allegedly. I'm going to say allegedly because, again, I don't know if it was true or not. But these people got a channel from an entity by the name of Ra. And I think I talked about this in my last video. And this entity was telling them that Earth is being run by negative interdimensional entities from a group called the Orions, these negative entities, and that the God of the Bible, Yahweh, is one of those entities from the Orion star system. So people were thinking that this was some type of God, but in actuality, it's an interdimensional being, or at least that's what that entity was saying, that was giving the information. But it makes sense. It makes sense that this entity that people have been worshiping, it makes sense now. Everything seems to connect. So going back to the girl next door, this woman Ruth had, let me just loop back around to that for a minute. She had her sons, she had neighborhood people, even girls, watching as they brutally tortured Ruth and her handicapped sister. And I'm sorry, Meg and her handicapped sister, not Ruth. Ruth is the wicked aunt. And it became clear to me that Ruth was also a symbol for Ahariman and Yahweh and that God of the Bible as well. Because when you listen to how she speaks about women and her mentality about men and women, you can tell what she was about. You can tell what she was about. She hated women. She hated herself. And she had her sons even sexually assault the older girl, Meg. And this was all because Meg was a talented artist. She drew a picture of the young guy next door who's telling this story from his adulthood. She drew a picture of him when they were children, of him swimming or going into the water or something like that. And here we go with the symbolism of water once again. But she drew a picture of him, and Ruth took that as, oh, she must wanted to fuck him, basically. And she was furious. Ruth was furious with Meg. And that is what encouraged her to eventually put her in the basement, strip her of all her clothes, and she did some of the most heinous thing. I can't even find words to describe what she did to that young girl. She did some of the most heinous things to that young girl so she would not be beautiful. And she allowed the neighborhood kids to come in and watch, even some other girls. Because her sole purpose, which is the sole purpose of people who manifest that deity, even in these Christian churches now, their sole purpose is to keep you in fear. And everyone knows that. The soul, what really drives them is fear, panic, and pandemonium. There is no peace in that. They're not about peace. That is why a lot of them never find it. Meg was a representation of the great mother Sophia, and Ruth was the representation of Yahweh. Because Ruth was so jealous of Meg's creativity. She was so jealous of the light that was in Meg. I'm talking symbolically, and the character. So don't get it twisted. She was so jealous of her niece because her niece was creative. She was beautiful, and she had a beautiful spirit, and she was powerful. So she had to degrade that. How many of you have been through that in your life? Just symbolically, it may not have been the physical trauma that Meg went through in the movie, but how many of you have been through that in your life where you know that you have power? Not to lord it over other people, to say I'm more powerful than you and all. No, none of that. None of that low demonic vibrating shit. None of that. But how many of you have actually been through that where a lesser person, a person of lesser emotional, a person of no emotional intelligence, who's probably religious, who did that to you? It's the same thing in the movie, the Antoine Fisher story. They saw that Antoine Fisher was a chosen one. And what did that woman do? She abused him. She instilled fear in them. And every Sunday, where were they? In that church. And you saw that same demon. You saw that same demon. That same evil entity that black people worship every day. Yeah, I'm calling you niggas out. That you worship every motherfucking day. And then you wonder why you're all broke down. You wonder why you got all these diseases. You wonder why you're going through this. Oh, I'm going through this. I'm going through. You wonder why. I was looking at a movie called Down in the Delta. And in one of the scenes, one of the characters said, "Sister, the devil is strong." Yeah, you're right. The devil y'all worship it's strong over your life. And what's so interesting is black people of today, you see, you can call white people the devil all you want, and I don't give a fuck who gets offended. You can call white people the devil all you want. But I really don't look at them as being that powerful and that savvy as you all do. And that's no disrespect to white people. I just don't think that they are that great in the sense of being called a devil. You know what I'm saying? That's just me personally. And I don't give a fuck who gets offended by it. You can call white people the devil all you want. And yes, they have done some horrible motherfucking things. But I tell you one motherfucking thing. I tell you one thing. As a collective, they have done some horrible things, but so have a lot of people. But I'll tell you one thing. The entity that they serve is not the same entity that black people serve. See, black people serve a different type of entity. They serve Yahweh, Orion, Jehovah. That is who black people serve. White people serve another type of entity. And you can tell in the types of things that they do. See, the difference between the evil that black people do and white people do, black people are not as physical with you. See, white people are physical. Black people can be physical too, but black people attack your mind. White people attack your body. Now, white people can attack the mind too, but I'm understanding a little bit more from my own experience. Black people really like to attack your mind. They like to use mind control on you. They use low-level demonic tricks. And what's so sad is black people, you're not even operating in your demonic higher hierarchy. You're operating in your lower hierarchy like a lot of white people are. In that low vibrating Luciferian type of shit. That is where you're operating at. From TD Jakes to Creflo Dollar, all of them serve that one deity. All of them serve it. They serve that. That is why they are cold-blooded. That is why they are just no emotion. That is why they are so money hungry, because in that mythology of creation of that of the creation of Yahweh, he created his children and lower demons to have wealth and prosperity and all of those things. And I do believe that one of his demonic children, their name is wealth. That is why you have these mega churches that have all of this money, because they tap into those demonic forces. But when you're a blind follower, you can't see that. They suck you dry and take everything that you have so they can build their empires, and they especially do this to black women in the church. So if you're a religious person, well, first of all, if you're a religious person, you shouldn't be watching me anyway. But if you're a religious person watching me, I don't give a fuck if you're offended or not. I said what the fuck I said, and this is not what I think. This is what I know. This is not what I think. This is what I know. See, our ancestors, the reason that things were kind of worked out a little bit better for them magically and spiritually, because they were tapping into the real spirituality and the real magic. They didn't follow that deity because they already knew that that was a corrupt interdimensional being. They knew that Yahweh was corrupt and was a corrupt interdimensional being that was a false god. They knew that. They knew that. And let me say this. This has nothing to do with Jesus Christ. Christ comes from the Great Mother. Christ comes from the Great Mother. See, this is the whole thing. Our ancestors, they understood this. But a lot of the records were burned. A lot of the ancient stuff was burned and destroyed, and what was left over, it's somewhere in the Vatican. The Vatican holds a lot, the Catholic Church holds a lot of ancient information that was either banned, burned, or destroyed. Well, being burned is the same thing as being destroyed. So when the Roman Empire, along with the Catholic Church, when they came into power, they came together and they decided to create this one God. And this one God was this evil entity, this interdimensional entity, Yahweh, Orion, and Jehovah. In Xena the Warrior Princess, they show you this. They show you how this one deity took over. Because I used to watch Xena Warrior Princess. Now, this show came on almost 30 years ago, so you got to forgive me, but you get what I'm saying. In one episode of Xena, he became a main antagonist. He was called, I think, Dayhawk. When Dayhawk, see, the Olympics at one time in ancient Kemet or Egypt and ancient antiquity, Greece, They all believed in more than one deity. They worshiped more than one God. But they were showing you how in Xena, how this one God, Dayhawk, came into power. And it kind of canceled all of the other gods. It really shows you the historical context in a way, in an entertaining way. But I understood it because Dayhawk was an evil. Dayhawk was an evil. He was an evil entity, and Dayhawk was a representation of Yahweh and Jehovah. And then he had a daughter named Hope. In actuality, this is why people say that Hope is really evil. I get it now. Because Hope is a false deity as well. Gabrielle, Xena's sidekick, remember she gave birth to a daughter named Hope who was evil. See, Hope is the child of Yahweh and Jehovah. That is why when people say, let's have hope, that's really evil in a sense. That's evil in a sense. And it's evil because a lot of times people want to give you false hope. They're not giving you the real hope. They're not giving, see, the real hope is still trapped in Pandora's box. Remember when they opened up Pandora's box and let out all of the evils of the world? That's another, and listen, I'm only talking in symbolism. So don't take what I'm saying literally per se, but I'm talking in symbolism. Okay? I'm talking in symbolism. And when I say false hope, I'm talking about, look at the shit that Obama kept saying, hope, 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 because he's up under that energy as well. That is the entity that they all serve. You want to know who the antichrist is? The antichrist is Yahweh, Jehovah, and Orion. That has nothing to do with the protons and neutrons and the electrons that make up melanin. That has nothing to do with that. They tried to tie that in to confuse people. And people are actually buying that. Your antichrist is Ahariman, Yahweh, and Jehovah. That is your antichrist right there. Remember, even in the Bible, it says, see, the Bible is a book of codes, but you have to understand how to decode it. Even in the Bible, it says we're not dealing with flesh and blood. We're dealing with spiritual wickedness in high places. Understand what that really means. See, that has many different meanings. It's not just one meaning. It has many different layers to that. We're not dealing with flesh and blood. We're dealing with spiritual wickedness in high places. When Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days in the Bible, I guess he was meditating and doing things of that nature. When he went into the wilderness, they say he was tempted by the devil. But he wasn't tempted by the devil. Well, he was tempted. He wasn't tempted by Satan. He wasn't tempted by Satan. He was tempted by Jehovah and Yahweh. That's who he was tempted by. They told Jesus, I will give you all of the riches of the world and all of the kingdoms of the world. And that is the MO. Remember, I told you a couple of minutes ago that in his ignorance, thinking that he was the all-powerful God, he began to create sub-demons and his own creations, that Yahweh entity from the Orion system, which I want to know, is that connected to the Orion logo, the Orion movie logo? Is that connected to the Orion movie logo? The Orion pictures? Are those the entities you're talking about? I just want to know. Still want to know. But remember I told you earlier that Yahweh created sub-demons, lower level demons. And these lower level demons, He gave them riches and wealth and all of that. Same thing. He was trying to tempt Jesus. If you notice in the Bible, there was always conflict surrounding that deity. And when you bring this up to people and you say, well, he went through Egypt and killed Pharaoh's firstborn. But do people understand symbolically what was really going on? Do people understand what was symbolically really going on? The reason that that deity did that was because he was threatened by those other energies. What they were basically showing you and telling you in the Bible, even in that story, they were showing you how the Roman Catholic Church and the Romans or whatever came in. They saw that these people were powerful and they were a threat to their institution, and they started taking people out because it's an entity, it's a spirit or energy, but the people that channel it, like your TD Jakes, like your ancient Roman Empire emperors and stuff like that. A lot of those ancient Roman empires or emperors, a lot of those people, they were channeling that entity. That is who they were talking to. When they say that the Bible is inspired by God, it was inspired by that shit of that entity. And it was put in code. This is the real thing. The real wisdom is being able to look beyond what you see in the Bible and to see it for what it really is. The God of the Bible is evil as fuck. It's Christ. And they took a lot of his stuff out of the book. See, there are a lot of books that have been banned and burned, or they've been hidden. And when the information is allowed to come out, I noticed they still put a fearful spin on it. Oh, if you don't believe in this, you're going to burn in hell and all this other bullshit that they try to, throw at people. Hell is real and all that. Hell is real for those people who understand it in that way. It's real for them in that way. I do believe that people can go to a very negative place when they die. I do believe that, but I don't really want to get into that because that's according to your own personal view. That's according to your own personal view. I think hell, now I'm not going to say I think, hell is this. Hell is a constant cycle of events and a series of events that are constantly happening that are not in favor or in alignment with what you want. You could be in hell and not even know it. You can be in hell and not even know it. It is so limiting to think that it's all about somebody burning. That is a limited, childish way of thinking. Because that deity is childish and petty. Tells you in the Bible, I'm a petty, jealous God. But that's what these motherfuckers serve. So when I really look at this in totality, that is the Antichrist. You want to know the true identity of the Antichrist? It's Yahweh. And they're trying to bring that physical manifestation of Yahweh into the physical world. See, that is where they're talking about, the Antichrist being an actual person. See, that makes me go back to the Omen, especially the Omen 4, when it was about the little girl Delia. A lot of y'all maybe have not seen that. It's called the Omen, the Awakening. It came out in 1991. And you have to understand what the 90s were all about to understand why they named that movie what it did in 1991. Because in 1991, there was a mass awakening that was taking place, but people were not paying attention. That is why there were so many black on black crimes, during that time. That is why the hip hop, genre really began to kind of shift in the 90s, because there was a major shift that was going on in the early 90s. People keep talking about there's shifts going on now. Not as many that was going on back then. There's some shifts that are taking place. I get that. But there were a lot of major spiritual shifts that took place in the late 80s and the early 90s. And trust me, honey, I know I was there. I was part of it. I was victimized by that system at that time. But the only thing that got me through that was the grace of the ancestors and the God that is within me. The grace of God. And I'm not talking about that God that they worship. I'm talking about the God in me. That is what got me through that. The Omen came out in the Omen 4 came out in 1991. And it was about Delia. It was about Delia. And she was supposedly the daughter of Damien, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, she was supposedly the daughter of Damien. And some kind of way, she was Damien's twin, come to find out. She wasn't his actual daughter. She was his twin. When Damien had sex with some woman in part 3, I don't want to get into all that, he impregnated her. And it's something called fetus papyraceus. Let me look it up. Or fetal papyraceus. See, a lot of stuff they put in these movies, they're showing you what's really going on, but we really don't pay attention. Fetal papyraceus. The term fetus papyraceus is used when an intrauterine fetal demise of a twin occurs early in pregnancy. A rare condition which describes a mummified fetus in multiple gestation pregnancy, in which one fetus dies and becomes flattened between the membranes of the other fetus and the uterine wall. Well, in the movie, some kind of way, Delia ended up carrying, it was crazy. She ended up carrying Damien's, what was it? They injected some eggs in her as a little girl. She was a little girl, only 8 years old. They inject, you know how they do embryos? They injected Damien's embryo into her. And if you really study the Omen, and I've studied the Omen, if you really study it and you really understand who Damien Thorn really was, Damien Thorn was a representation of Yahweh. He wanted to know where his followers were at all times. If you didn't do what, even though I did say in a couple of videos back that wasn't nobody bothering, Damien wasn't bothering anybody. But when you really look at it symbolically, Damien was similar to that deity. If you didn't do what he said, he would kill you. If you discovered who he was and you were against it, he would kill you. And remember, throughout the movie, they kept telling people the only thing that can save you is Jesus Christ. And that's because Christ is more powerful than that God. Because Christ, in actuality, let me take away all of the mumbo jumbo. In actuality, Christ is the great mother Sophia. Boom. Because Christ is feminine energy. But they had to make Christ into a man and connect it to Yahweh so they can make that deity more powerful. So when I look at things in totality, it makes perfect sense to me why the world is the way that it is now. When I look at people and I see how they're acting so off, and why they've been acting off. This isn't something that just started happening. It's been going on for generations. That's because they took the spirit out of spirituality and they replaced it with unbalanced, masculine, misogynistic, demonic, low-level energy. They're not even operating in their higher hierarchy demonic energy anymore. And I know when people hear that word demonic, they get scared because they don't understand what demons really are. Demons were the ones that were helping Christ when heaven abandoned him. It was the demons that helped him. When the angels abandoned him, when he was like, well, God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me? And that's symbolic for what that entity that people worship does. That is why you don't get any real work or any real results working with that energy. Because it's not for you. It's to feed off of you. And I know what people are going to say, well, I prayed and I've gotten answers. Maybe you did. And maybe it's because maybe you're part of that pantheon. Because that really explains a lot of the bizarre behavior that I've seen in a lot of black people lately. I expect bizarre behavior from white people sometimes. I get it. And that's not being racist. I'm just being truthful. I get it. White people are who they are. Do you get mad at a snake for being a snake? Do you get mad at a monkey for being a monkey, for eating bananas? No. They are what they are. But it's up to us as the most ancient and the most, supposed to be the most emotionally intelligent, or we were, not anymore. It's up to us to really understand what's going on as cosmic beings as we are. But instead, we become a slave to it. Anything that we touch, we start becoming a slave to it. Now, it's one thing to be humble when you deal with your spirits or your deities. Humbleness is one thing. But we become a slave to it. And that's the problem, because we have been programmed for generations to be slaves. So when I look at things in totality, when I look at everything that has been transpiring, it really makes perfect sense. That is because that's who they worship, and that's the energy that they pull from. That is why they are so that is why when you find so many evil, demonic, religious people in general. That is why. Look at what they're pulling from. They're pulling from something that has negative, nefarious intentions in the first place. If this is all factual. And see, people don't really want to wake up. It's uncomfortable for me even to hear that a lot of people may be microchipped and mind controlled. See, all of that comes from that Orion shit. If that's true, that all of that being microchipped, monitoring people, that comes from that entity and that deity, Jehovah and Yahweh. And see, I'm going to take it a step further back. I'm going to go back further. Is this the real reason that Madeline Mary O'Hare was murdered? And I know a lot of people did not like her because they said she was mean, she was nasty, and they said that she was an atheist and they didn't like. But let's put that to the side. What did Madeline Mary O'Hare really know? Because she knew some shit. And she denounced. I had a certain amount of respect for her, even though I don't, the ideologies of, atheism, I don't follow that. But I had a certain amount of respect for her because she said to that Christian God, Yahweh, she basically gave him a big fucking finger, like I have done my entire life. Not Christ. Not Christ. Not the Christ energy. I'm talking about that energy. She spoke up against it. And she was very, 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 very warm to black people. And she was very, very, very warm to gay people as well. She treated black people and gay people very, very well. And she actually spoke out against a lot of the racism, which is why I don't understand how black people can follow that. I tell you. And then you wonder why you can't get out of these cycles. This is why. But what did Madeline Mary O'Hare really know? What did she really know? And for those of you who are young who don't know who Madeline Mary O'Hare was, she had prayer taken out of, or she advocated to have prayer taken out of the school based upon the fact that it was being forced on people. And she was saying that if a person is not religious, they should not be forced to say prayers. And that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. You should not force anything on anyone that they don't want to do. But that deity, that's exactly what that deity and the energy and the representation of that deity, that is what they do. They try to force their religion on you. And when you tell them you're not interested, they're going to ask you why. When you become combative with them because they're trying to bully you, then they'll say you have a mental problem. Like my family does me. They'll tell me, they'll say fucked up shit to me. But then when I respond to it, they'll say that I have a mental problem. And they will circulate that shit. But in actuality, all of them are probably microchipped and programmed and connected to that deity. I know they're connected to it. And if you notice, it's like a cult mentality. When you don't go along, this is what a lot of this family shit is really not family the way that it should be. Because true family allows you to live your life the way that you want to. See, I used to really like Shahrazad Ali, and I'm not going to disrespect her, but when I started listening to her here recently, she's probably been saying this for a long time, but when I listened to some of the things that she said about, well, you got to listen to somebody, and it's not about being your own individual. Oh, yes, the fuck it is. Anything outside of being your own individual is you trying to force or enslave someone into, or trying to enforce someone into something that they don't want. And that is when I started really looking at a lot of these people, and I'm saying, you know, they're part of a bigger cult. And they're also part of that energy of the demiurge, aka Yahweh, BKA Ahariman. They're also part of that energy because they want to enforce things on you. A lot of these Christian songs, they're not singing to Jesus. They're not singing to Christ, because if they were singing to Christ, people would feel it. They're singing to God. And I'm talking about that God, Yahweh, that they worship, which he's really not a God. He's an interdimensional being. That's who they sing to. There's a song that came out in 1990, and here we go with the 90s again. There's a song that came out called A Good Friend of Mine and Yours. And it's by the Winans, and we all know who the Winans are. And when I listened to that song, even when I heard it back when I was a child in the 90s, the 90s were very, they were a very depressing time. Because there was a lot of propaganda going on in the 90s, a lot of religious propaganda, at least from my perspective, that was going on in the 90s. And it really caused a lot of fear. Like that guy, Jack Vanapee presents, he's dead now, but I think Rexella, his wife, oh, Jack, oh, the Lord is getting ready to come and destroy all our enemies. Jack, oh, what's he on? All that old bullshit. But it was a lot of propaganda going on in the 90s. But anyway, there was a song by the Winans family that came out called A Good Friend of Mine and Yours. And it goes something like this. A good friend, a good friend, a good friend of mine and yours. It goes like that. When I listen to that song, it feels dreadful. I almost want to vomit. It feels dreadful. It feels absolutely depressing. And that's because, and I'm going to tell you all something, that's because the energy of that song has a lot of low-level demonic energy. There was a lot of ritualistic stuff that went into making that song. There was a lot of ritualistic stuff that went into making that song. I'm talking about feces magic, forced homosexuality, forced onto people, men forcing themselves onto other men, brutalizing them. A lot of energy behind that song. And we all know that the church and that institution, the religious institution, we all know how they have harmed children. We all know that. This is how they build their empires, off of harming children. This is what this entity does. He wanted Abraham to sacrifice his only son. What they're not really telling you in the Bible, it wasn't necessarily about killing his son. He wanted Abraham to have sex with his son on an altar. See, people not reading between the lines. They're not reading between the lines. And I know what y'all gonna say, you're a crazy fag. That's okay. I'll be that. I'm also an evil, powerful one too, if I have to be. Get into it, honey. Get into it. Anyway, that's all I really have to say. I felt spirited today, and yesterday was my birthday. And I turned 44, and I feel so good. I feel really good. My friend, he's taking me out to dinner tonight for my birthday. And, I feel good. I feel good. I don't have any complaints. Somebody asked me, how do you feel being 44? I feel the same way that I did when I was 24, actually. I'm healthy. I can breathe. I have no issues. I am content with me. I am happy with me. And I wish that for everyone. I wish that a real blessing for everyone, that watches me and that really rocks with me, But I just had to come through and talk about that because that's been on my heart. It's been on my mind. And that's all I really have to say. And for those people who are in opposition to what I have to say, you have to fucking deal with it. If you don't like what I'm saying, then get out that motherfucking religion. Not because I want you to, but do it because you have true wisdom now. Thank you.